At 66 years old, I never imagined my own daughter would hand me a typed work schedule in my own living room, sunrise to midnight shifts as an unpaid servant, while my son in law smirked and called my pension house money. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought I knew about family and how I fought to reclaim not just my home, but my very soul. Stay with me until the end of this journey and please comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far my story travels across this great country of ours. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in September. I was standing at my kitchen sink, the same white porcelain fixture I'd been washing dishes in for 37 years, watching the sunrise paint my backyard maple tree in shades of gold. At 66, I'd grown to cherish these quiet moments before the world demanded my attention. My arthritis hadn't kicked in yet, my coffee was still hot, and for those precious few minutes, life felt manageable. I should have known peace never lasts. The sound of car doors slamming in my driveway made me glance toward the front window. My daughter Sabrina's silver Honda sat there, engine still ticking as it cooled, but it wasn't alone. Behind it sat a black pickup truck I didn't recognize, and emerging from the driver's seat was my son-in-law Victor, all 6'2" of him, unfolding like a bad omen. Mom, Sabrina's voice carried through the house as she used her key, the one I'd given her for emergencies years ago, back when I still believed family meant something different than what I was about to learn. I dried my hands on the dish towel, the same faded blue one with tiny roosters that my late husband Frank had always said looked ridiculous, but never threw away. Everything in this house held memories of Frank, and I wasn't ready to examine why that suddenly felt important. In the kitchen, honey, I called back, forcing brightness into my voice. Sabrina had been distant lately, always stressed about money, always sharp-edged when she visited. I told myself it was the economy, the pressures of raising two kids, the way life had gotten harder for everyone since Frank passed 3 years ago. But when Sabrina walked into my kitchen, I knew this wasn't a social call. Her jaw was set in that determined line she'd inherited from her father, and she was carrying a manila folder like she was heading to a business meeting instead of visiting her mother. "We need to talk," she said, and those 4 words landed in my stomach like ice water. Victor appeared behind her, filling my kitchen doorway with his broad shoulders and that perpetual smirk that had always made me uncomfortable. Where Sabrina at least tried to maintain the pretense of affection, Victor had never bothered. From the day they'd started dating 15 years ago, he'd looked at me like I was something inconvenient that needed to be managed. "Good morning, Victor," I said, because Frank had raised me to be polite even when everything inside me was screaming warnings. He grunted something that might have been a greeting and helped himself to a seat at my kitchen table. Frank's chair I couldn't help but notice. The man had no sense of boundaries, never had. He spread out like he owned the place, which I should have recognized as foreshadowing. "Sit down, Mom." Sabrina's tone wasn't a request. I stayed standing, gripping the edge of my counter. At 66, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me to run. But you can't run from your own kitchen, your own daughter, your own life. "What's this about, sweetheart?" Sabrina opened the manila folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. The top one looked official, typed in neat columns with headers and bullet points. She slid it across my kitchen table like she was serving papers. "This is about reality, Mom. About the fact that you're living in a 4-bedroom house by yourself while we're crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment with the kids." I stared at the document, my reading glasses somewhere upstairs. The words blurred together, but I could make out what looked like a schedule. Times, tasks, numbers. "I don't understand." "It's simple," Victor said, leaning back in Frank's chair until it creaked. "We're moving in. Today." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? We've been struggling, Mom." Sabrina's voice took on that wheedling tone she'd used as a teenager when she wanted something. The rent on our apartment went up again, and with Emma starting high school and Jason needing new everything for middle school, we just can't make it work anymore. I looked between them, trying to process what was happening. So you want to, what? Stay here for a while. Not stay, Victor said. Live, permanently. The word permanently echoed in my kitchen like a death sentence. But honey, this is my house. And we're family, Sabrina interrupted. Emma and Jason are your grandchildren. Don't you want them to have a stable home? The emotional blackmail was so smooth, so practiced that I almost fell for it. Almost. But 37 years of marriage to Frank had taught me to recognize manipulation even when it came wrapped in family loyalty. Of course, I want them to be stable, but there's no but, Mommy. Mom, we've already given notice on our apartment. The lease is up at the end of the month. My mouth went dry. You gave notice without talking to me. We're talking to you now, Victor said, and that smirk was back. I reached for the papers with shaking hands, holding them at arm's length to try to make out the words. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a schedule, all right. A work schedule. My work schedule. 6:00 a.m., wake up, start breakfast. 6:30 a.m., coffee ready for Victor and Sabrina. 7:00 a.m., breakfast served. See attached meal plan, 7:30 a.m. Pack lunches for Emma and Jason. 8:00 a.m., drive Jason to middle school, 8:30 a.m. Drive Emma to high school, 9:00 a.m. Return home, begin laundry. 10:00 a.m., grocery shopping. See attached weekly budget, 11:00 a.m. Meal prep for dinner, 12:00 p.m. Lunch preparation, 1:00 p.m. House cleaning, Monday bathrooms, Tuesday bedrooms. The list went on, scheduled down to 15-minute increments, ending at 11:30 p.m. with prepare for next day lights out. What is this? I whispered. It's a fair division of labor, Sabrina said. You'll handle the household management, and we'll handle the financial responsibilities. Financial responsibilities. Victor pulled out another sheet of paper. Your pension and Social Security will go toward household expenses. We've calculated everything out. Mortgage, utilities, food insurance. Your benefits should just about cover it. I stared at him, unable to speak. They weren't just moving into my house. They were taking it over completely, turning me into an unpaid housekeeper in my own home. This is insane, I finally managed. It's practical, Sabrina said, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. Mom, you're getting older. You shouldn't be living alone in this big house anyway. What if you fall? What if something happens? So this is for my own good. Yes, actually it is. We'll be here to take care of you and you'll have purpose structure. You've been drifting since Dad died, and that's not healthy. Drifting. The word stung because there was truth in it. Since Frank's death, I had been struggling to find meaning in my days, but this wasn't the answer. This was something else entirely. And if I say no, the silence that followed was heavy with threat. Well, Victor said, finally, you'd be turning your back on your own grandchildren. Emma and Jason would know their grandmother chose a house over them. Plus, Sabrina added, you really should think about whether you can handle this place on your own. The maintenance, the expenses. Property taxes have gone up, and I noticed the gutters need work. The roof probably needs attention soon, too. More manipulation, but this time with teeth. They were painting a picture of me as helpless, irresponsible, selfish, all while positioning themselves as my saviors. I need time to think about this. There's no time, Victor said. The moving truck will be here Thursday. Thursday. My voice cracked. That's 2 days from now. We would have told you sooner, Sabrina said, but we knew you'd overthink it. This way it's just easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. Not easier for me, the person whose life was being completely rearranged without consent. I looked at the schedule again, trying to absorb the reality of what they were proposing. Every minute of my day planned out by someone else. Every dollar of my income allocated to expenses I'd never agreed to. My role in my own home reduced to that of live-in help. Where would I sleep? I asked weakly. We'll take the master bedroom, Victor said. You can have the small bedroom at the end of the hall. It'll be cozier for you anyway. The small bedroom. The room Frank and I had used for storage, barely big enough for a twin bed. They were demoting me to servants' quarters in my own house. What about my things? We'll help you sort through everything, Sabrina said. You've probably got way too much stuff anyway. It'll be good for you to downsize. My things. 37 years of marriage, 66 years of life reduced to stuff that needed to be sorted through by people who saw me as an inconvenience. And Emma and Jason, what do they think about this? Something flickered across Sabrina's face, guilt maybe, or shame. They're excited to live with Grandma. Though Emma might need some space, you know how teenagers are. No, I thought. I didn't know how Emma was anymore. I barely saw my grandchildren these days, and when I did, they were glued to their phones or asking for money. The idea that they were excited about anything involving me seemed unlikely. I don't think I started. Mom, Sabrina's voice turned cold. Let me be clear. We're not asking for permission. We're telling you what's happening. You can be part of the solution, or you can make this harder for everyone. But either way, we're moving in Thursday. The threat was naked now, stripped of all pretense. This wasn't a discussion or a negotiation. It was a takeover. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, not Frank's chair. Victor was still sprawled in that like a conquering king. My hands shook as I tried to make sense of what was happening. This is my house, I said quietly. And we're your family, Victor replied. Unless you don't think family matters. Another manipulation, another twist of the knife. But this time, something inside me flickered, not quite resistance, but awareness. This wasn't how family was supposed to work. I need to think, I said again. Think all you want, Victor said, standing up from Frank's chair. But we'll be here Thursday with the moving truck. You might want to start clearing out that storage room. They left then, Sabrina pausing at the door like she wanted to say something else, but Victor's hand on her elbow pulled her along. I heard their car doors slam, heard the engines start, heard them drive away from my house. Our house, according to them. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after they left, holding that schedule like it was a death sentence. Because in a way it was. It was the death of Margaret Everett as an independent human being, the birth of Margaret Everett as unpaid domestic labor. The house felt different now, like it was already slipping away from me. I walked through the rooms Frank and I had shared, seeing them through Victor and Sabrina's eyes. The living room where they'd probably install their big screen TV. The dining room where they'd eat meals I'd prepared and serve guests I hadn't invited. The master bedroom where they'd sleep in the bed Frank and I had shared for 3 decades. And me, I'd be in the storage room at the end of the hall, waking up at 6 a.m. to make coffee for people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient servant. I found myself standing in Frank's study, surrounded by his books and papers, his reading chair still positioned by the window where he used to watch the birds at our feeder. If Frank were alive, none of this would be happening. Frank would have told Victor exactly where he could shove his work schedule, would have reminded Sabrina what respect looked like. But Frank wasn't here, and I was alone with a decision that felt impossible. Say yes and lose myself completely. Say no and lose my family. Either way, I lost. That first night, I lay awake in my own bed, possibly for one of the last times, and tried to imagine what my life would look like under their rule. Would I have to ask permission to visit friends, to buy myself a book or a new dress? Would I be allowed opinions about meals or decorating, or when to turn on the air conditioning? Would I still be me, or would I become some shadow version of myself, existing only to serve other people's needs? The answer terrified me. But more terrifying was the alternative, being completely alone, labeled as selfish, cut off from Emma and Jason, painted as the grandmother who chose possessions over people. I'd been alone before those first awful months after Frank died, and I remembered how the silence had nearly swallowed me whole. The thought of facing that again this time with the added weight of family rejection felt unbearable. So when Thursday morning arrived with the rumble of a moving truck in my driveway, I didn't resist. I didn't call a lawyer or change the locks or stand in my doorway with righteous fury. I moved my belongings into the storage room and watched strangers carry my daughter's life into my house. I told myself it was temporary, that we'd figure out a better arrangement once everyone settled in. I told myself that having family close would be good for me, that Emma and Jason needed stability, that this was what Frank would have wanted. I told myself a lot of lies that first day because the truth was too heavy to carry. The truth was that I had just signed my own death warrant. Not physical death. I was healthy enough for my age, strong enough to handle the work they were demanding, but the death of everything that made me who I was, the death of choice, of dignity, of self-determination. As I sat on the narrow twin bed in my new room listening to Victor bark orders at the movers and Sabrina reorganize my kitchen according to her preferences, I realized that this wasn't about family or practicality or even money. This was about power, and I had just handed all of mine over without a fight. But that was Thursday. This story isn't about Thursday. This story is about what came next, and how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the thing that saves your life. The first morning in my storage room, I woke up to the sound of Victor's alarm at 5:30 a.m. The walls in this old house were thinner than I'd ever noticed before, and his clock radio blared classic rock through the hallway like a declaration of war against peace itself. I lay there on my narrow twin bed, staring at the ceiling that was barely 6 feet from my face, listening to him stomp around what used to be my bedroom. The master bathroom faucet squealed when he turned it on, a sound Frank and I had learned to ignore over the years, but now it felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. By the time I dragged myself out of bed at 6 a.m. according to the schedule, Victor was already in my kitchen, sitting in Frank's chair with a cup of coffee that he'd apparently made himself. "Morning, Margaret," he said without looking up from his phone. "No, good morning. No, how did you sleep?" Just my name spoken like an acknowledgement that the help had arrived for duty. "Good morning, Victor." And I tied my bathrobe tighter and moved toward the coffee pot, hoping there was some left. "Oh, that's the last of it," he said, still scrolling through his phone. "You'll need to make a fresh pot. Sabrina likes hers with 2 sugars and that fancy creamer stuff." I stood there for a moment, absorbing the casual way he'd announced that I'd need to start over because he'd finished what was there. Not "sorry I didn't think to save you some," or "let me help you make more." Just a flat statement that this was now my job. The coffee can felt heavier than usual in my arthritic hands. Everything felt heavier. Sabrina appeared just as I was measuring grounds, looking put together in her work clothes and checking her phone like Victor had been doing. They moved around each other with the practiced efficiency of people who'd been married for 15 years, but they moved around me like I was a piece of furniture that occasionally needed to be worked around. "Morning, Mom," Sabrina said, barely glancing in my direction. "Emma's got early band practice, so she'll need a ride at 7:15 instead of 8, Hazard. That shouldn't mess up your schedule too much." My schedule. The words hit me like a slap. It was day 1, and they were already making changes to the elaborate timetable they'd created for my life, announcing it like I was an employee who could be called in early or asked to stay late. "I'll need to get dressed," I said. "Well, obviously," Victor said. "Emma can't be late on her first day." First day. I'd forgotten that the kids were starting at new schools closer to my house in better districts. Another reason this arrangement was convenient for them and devastating for me. I hurried back to my room to get dressed, trying to be quiet since Jason was still sleeping in the bedroom next to mine. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was tiptoeing around in my own house, trying not to wake a 13-year-old who would probably sleep until noon if left alone. When I came back to the kitchen, Emma was there looking uncomfortable in her new school clothes. At 15, she was all arms and legs and attitude, but this morning the attitude was subdued, replaced by something that might have been embarrassment. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart." I tried to smile at her, but she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Emma, your grandmother's going to drive you to school from now on," Sabrina announced. "Won't that be nice?" Emma's face flushed red. "Mom, I told you I could take the bus." "The bus takes too long, and this way Grandma has something useful to do." Something useful to do. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep my hands from shaking. This was my granddaughter they were talking about, and they were presenting our relationship like it was a convenient carpool arrangement. "I'm happy to drive you, Emma," I said, and I meant it. At least it would get me out of the house, give me a few minutes of purpose that felt less like servitude. "Thanks," Emma mumbled, still not looking at me. The drive to Emma's new school was awkward in a way that made my heart hurt. She sat in the passenger seat with her headphones in, staring out the window like she was trying to disappear. I wanted to talk to her to ask about her friends or her classes or whether she was nervous about the new school, but every conversational opening died in my throat. What was I supposed to say? How do you feel about your parents essentially enslaving your grandmother? Or are you excited to watch me become unpaid domestic help? Instead, I drove in silence, stealing glances at this young woman who looked so much like Sabrina had at that age. But where Sabrina had been confident and outgoing, Emma seemed to shrink into herself, carrying some burden I couldn't identify. "Grandma," she said quietly as we pulled into the school parking lot. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm sorry about all this." The words hit me like a physical blow. This child, because despite her 15 years, she was still a child, was apologizing for her parents' behavior. She understood something was wrong with this arrangement, even if she didn't have the power to stop it. "It's not your fault, Emma," I said. "I know, but—" She trailed off, then gathered her backpack and opened the car door. "Thanks for the ride." I watched her walk toward the school building, her shoulders hunched like she was bracing against a strong wind, and I felt something crack open in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. Whatever was happening in my house was affecting my grandchildren too, and not in the positive way Sabrina had claimed. The drive home gave me 20 minutes to think, 20 minutes of freedom before I had to return to my scheduled life. I found myself driving slowly, taking the long way, savoring the feeling of being alone with my thoughts. But all too soon I was back in my own driveway looking at my own house like it belonged to someone else. Victor's truck was gone. He'd left for his construction job, but Sabrina's car was still there. She worked from home doing bookkeeping for small businesses, which meant she'd be around all day monitoring my compliance with their schedule. I found her in what used to be my living room, setting up a desk where Frank's favorite reading chair used to sit. "How did Emma's drop-off go?" she asked without looking up from her laptop. "Fine. She seems nervous about the new school." "She'll adjust. Kids are resilient." Sabrina's tone was dismissive, like Emma's feelings were an inconvenience to be managed rather than acknowledged. I looked at the schedule taped to my refrigerator. Yes, they'd actually taped it there like I was a child who might forget her chores. According to the timetable, I was supposed to be starting laundry right now. "Sabrina," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something." "Mm-hmm." She was typing on her laptop, giving me about 10% of her attention. "This schedule, it doesn't leave any time for me to have a life of my own." That got her attention. She looked up from her screen with the expression of someone who'd been asked to explain something extremely obvious to someone extremely stupid. "What do you mean, Cho?" "I mean, when do I see my friends? When do I go to my book club or my doctor's appointments? When do I have time for myself?" Sabrina blinked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. "Mom, you're 76 years old." 66. "Whatever. The point is you don't need a social calendar like some college student. This gives you structure, purpose. You should be grateful." Grateful. I should be grateful for the privilege of being scheduled like a piece of equipment, grateful for the honor of serving people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient resource. But my book club can be rescheduled for evenings if it's really that important to you. Although honestly, Mom, you might want to think about whether reading romance novels is the best use of your time when your family needs you. Romance novels. My book club read literary fiction biographies, historical nonfiction. We'd just finished discussing a fascinating book about the women who worked as code breakers during World War II. But in Sabrina's mind, any leisure reading was frivolous. Any time spent on my own interests was time stolen from my proper role as the family servant. And my friends, Your friends can visit you here, that way you're still available if we need anything. Available, like a phone that needed to be answered, or a car that needed to be ready for use. I tried a different approach. What about grocery shopping? The schedule has me going every day, but I used to shop once a week. Daily shopping means fresher ingredients, Sabrina said. Plus, it gives you something to do, gets you out of the house. I thought you'd appreciate that. She thought I'd appreciate daily trips to the grocery store like some kind of entertainment. She thought I'd be grateful for the chance to spend my own money buying food for people who treated me like hired help. And the budget you've set for groceries is generous, Sabrina interrupted. We calculated it very carefully. I'd seen their calculation. It assumed I'd be buying generic brands, clipping coupons, shopping only sales. It assumed I'd stop being a person with preferences and become a resource to be optimized. What if I want to buy something special, something for myself? Like what? The question threw me. Like what? Like good cheese or decent wine or the expensive shampoo that didn't make my hair feel like straw? Like flowers for the dining room table or a new book or a small gift for a friend's birthday? I don't know, just something. Mom, you need to start thinking more practically. You're not living alone anymore, spending money on whatever catches your fancy. You're part of a family unit now, and that means thinking about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. What's best for everyone? The phrase she kept using to justify everything they were taking from me. That afternoon, while Sabrina worked in the living room and Jason played video games in his new bedroom, I tried to call my friend Dorothy. Dorothy and I had been friends for 20 years, ever since we'd met at a garden club meeting. She'd been my lifeline during Frank's illness and death, the person who brought me casseroles and sat with me during the worst nights. Margaret, Dorothy's voice was warm and familiar, a sound from my old life. I was just thinking about you. How are you settling in with Sabrina and Victor? I'd called Dorothy the day after the moving truck arrived, explaining the situation in the most positive terms I could manage. Now, 3 days into this new arrangement, positive seemed like a foreign concept. It's an adjustment, I said. I'm sure it is. Listen, we missed you at Book Club Tuesday. Are you still planning to come next week? We're starting the new Margaret Atwood next Tuesday. I looked at the schedule on my refrigerator, calculating. Tuesday was grocery shopping day and meal prep, and Jason had some after-school activity that required pickup at 4:30. I don't think I can make it, I said slowly. Oh, that's too bad. What about lunch this Friday? That new place downtown has been getting great reviews. Friday lunch. The schedule showed laundry house cleaning and grocery shopping for the weekend. Plus, I'd need to be available in case anyone needed anything. I can't do Friday either. There was a pause on Dorothy's end. Margaret, are you all right? You sound different. Did I sound different? I felt different. I felt like I was disappearing, like someone was gradually erasing me from my own life. I'm fine, I lied. Just busy getting used to everyone being here. Well, when things settle down, give me a call. I miss you. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, their kitchen now apparently, and tried to remember what I used to do on a typical Tuesday afternoon before my life became a carefully managed schedule. Had I really been drifting, as Sabrina claimed? Had my days been empty and purposeless? I used to read in the afternoon, or work in my garden, or call friends to chat about nothing important. I used to drive to the library or the bookstore, browse without urgency, maybe stop for coffee somewhere and watch people walk by. Sometimes I'd visit the art museum or take myself to lunch at that little cafe near downtown. None of those activities had seemed insignificant at the time. They'd felt like choices, like small freedoms that made up a life. Now they seemed impossibly luxurious, like privileges I'd taken for granted until someone decided I no longer deserved them. The sound of Victor's truck in the driveway interrupted my brooding. According to the schedule, I was supposed to have dinner preparations started by the time he got home. I'd been so lost in my conversation with Dorothy that I was running late. I hurried to pull ingredients from the refrigerator, trying to organize a meal, while Victor's heavy footsteps approached the back door. Something smells good, Wawa, he said as he came into the kitchen, though nothing was cooking yet and there was no smell to speak of. "I'm just getting started," I said, opening a package of chicken breasts. "Good, good. Hey, I've been thinking that back fence needs some work, and I know a guy who can do it cheap. Cash job, if you know what I mean." I didn't know what he meant, but I nodded anyway. "Anyway, it'll probably run about $800. I can front the money, but you'll need to pay me back." $800. I stared at the chicken in my hands, trying to process what he'd just said. "Pay you back." "Well, yeah, it's your fence, your house, but like I said, I know a guy who can do it right. My fence, my house." The words felt strange coming from his mouth when everything else about this arrangement suggested that nothing here belonged to me anymore. "I hadn't noticed the fence needing work," I said carefully. "Trust me, it needs work. I know about these things. Better to fix it now before it gets worse and costs even more." Trust me. The phrase that manipulative people always use right before they convinced you to do something against your own interests. "Can I think about it?" Victor's expression shifted just slightly. The casual friendliness disappeared, replaced by something harder. "Think about what it's basic maintenance, Margaret. You can't just let things fall apart because you don't want to spend money." The way he said my name made me flinch. Not Mom, like he'd been calling me, but Margaret spoken like a criticism. "I just like to research big expenses. $800 isn't a big expense for someone who owns a house like this. Unless you're having money problems I don't know about." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Money problems could be used to justify all sorts of interventions, all sorts of decisions made for my own good. "No, no money problems," I said quickly. "Good. Then we'll get the fence fixed next week." It wasn't a question anymore. It was a decision that had been made for me about my property with my money. That evening, as I served a dinner I'd cooked with groceries I'd bought to people who treated me like a servant, I tried to remember when I'd stopped being the person who made decisions in my own life. Had it happened all at once the moment they walked through my door with their work schedule and their demands, or had it been gradual, so subtle I hadn't noticed until it was too late? Emma pushed food around her plate without eating much, sneaking glances at me when she thought no one was looking. Jason wolfed down his meal and asked to be excused so he could get back to his video games. Sabrina and Victor discussed their days, their plans, their opinions about everything from politics to what we should watch on television. No one asked me about my day or my plans or my opinions. I was present, but invisible, necessary, but unimportant, useful, but unheard. "Margaret," Victor said as I cleared the dishes. "Tomorrow I'm having my mother come stay with us for a while." I froze with a stack of plates in my hands. "Your mother?" "Yeah, Marissa. She's been having some health issues and her apartment's not really suitable for someone who needs looking after." Looking after. My stomach dropped as I realized what he was implying. "How long is a while?" that I asked. "However long she needs," Sabrina said. "We can't abandon family when they need help." The irony of that statement coming from people who'd just turned me into unpaid domestic help was breathtaking. "Where will she sleep?" "The guest room upstairs," Victor said. "You'll need to get it ready. Fresh sheets, clear out whatever junk is stored up there." Junk. My Christmas decorations, photo albums, Frank's books that wouldn't fit in his study, the remnants of a life they saw as clutter to be managed. "And she'll need special meals," Sabrina added. "Nothing too spicy or rich. Her stomach is sensitive. Special meals." I was barely keeping up with cooking for 4 people, and now they wanted me to prepare separate food for a 5th person with specific dietary requirements. "I'm not sure I can," I started. "Can what?" Victor's voice was sharp. "Handle all of this, the cooking, the cleaning, the driving, and now taking care of your mother too." "She's family," Victor said, like that explained everything. "And it's not like you're doing anything else with your time." Nothing else with my time. I was working from 6 a.m. to nearly midnight according to their schedule, but apparently that didn't count as doing something with my time. "Besides," Sabrina said, "it'll be good for you to have another adult around during the day. You won't be so isolated. Isolated. They'd isolated me from my friends, my activities, my independent life, and now they were offering me the company of Victor's demanding mother as compensation. When is she arriving? I asked weakly. Sunday, Victor said. So you've got the weekend to get ready. 2 days. I had 2 days to prepare for another person to move into my house, another set of needs to anticipate and serve another voice telling me what I should be doing and how I should be doing it. That night, lying in my narrow bed in what used to be my storage room, I listened to the sounds of my own house and tried to recognize my life. Victor's snoring echoed through the walls from my old bedroom. Sabrina was watching television downstairs, some show I'd never heard of playing too loudly. Jason's video games beeped and chirped from the room next to mine, and somewhere in all that noise I was disappearing. Each day that passed, I felt myself becoming smaller, more invisible, more irrelevant. My opinions didn't matter. My preferences weren't considered. My needs were secondary to everyone else's convenience. I was becoming a ghost in my own house, haunting the edges of other people's lives. But ghosts, I was beginning to realize, can be dangerous when they decide they've had enough of being ignored. Sunday arrived with unseasonable heat and humidity that made everything feel sticky and oppressive. Victor had left early to pick up his mother, and I'd spent the morning cleaning the guest room and making up the bed with my best sheets, the ones Frank and I had received as a wedding gift 40 years ago. Sabrina supervised my preparations with the attention of a drill sergeant inspecting barracks. Make sure you put extra pillows on the bed, she instructed. Marissa has neck problems. And there should be a glass of water on the nightstand, she added. She takes medication at night. The temperature in that room runs warm, she continued. You might want to put a fan in there. Each instruction felt like another item being added to an already impossible list of responsibilities. I was already struggling to keep up with their original demands, and now I'd be caring for an elderly woman with medical issues and specific needs. What kind of health problems does she have? I asked. Oh, just the usual old age stuff, Sabrina said dismissively. Nothing serious. Nothing serious, but serious enough that she couldn't live independently, serious enough that she needed someone to look after her. The sound of Victor's truck in the driveway sent my anxiety spiking. Through the window, I watched him help a small, sharp-featured woman out of the passenger seat. Even from a distance, I could see that Marissa moved with the careful, deliberate steps of someone dealing with pain or stiffness. But when she walked through my front door, there was nothing frail about her attitude. So you're Margaret, she said, looking me up and down like she was evaluating livestock. Victor's told me all about you. It's nice to meet you, Marissa, I said, extending my hand. She ignored the gesture. I'll need my luggage taken to my room immediately. The drive was exhausting. Her luggage turned out to be 3 large suitcases and a box of personal items that Victor expected me to carry upstairs. My arthritis was screaming by the time I got everything to the guest room, but Marissa wasn't finished with her demands. The pillows are too soft, she announced after testing the bed. I need firm support for my neck. I can get different pillows, I said. And this room is too warm. I can't sleep when it's warm. I put a fan. I don't like the noise fans make. You'll need to do something about the air conditioning. Victor appeared in the doorway. Mom, give Margaret a chance to get you settled. I'm just explaining what I need, Marissa said. At my age, comfort isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. At her age. Marissa was 71, only 5 years older than me, but she spoke like the gap between us was decades instead of years. Of course, I said. I'll do whatever I can to make you comfortable. Good. Now I'll need my meals brought to my room. My digestion is delicate, and eating in a noisy kitchen upsets my stomach. Meals brought to her room. I was already cooking, serving, and cleaning up after 4 people, and now I'd be running a room service operation as well. What kinds of foods can you eat? I asked. Plain foods. Nothing spicy, nothing too rich, definitely no garlic or onions. And I prefer my meat well done but not dried out. That's harder than it sounds. It sounded impossible, actually. How do you cook meat well done but not dried out? How do you make interesting meals without garlic or onions? I'll need my breakfast at exactly 8 o'clock, Marissa continued. Not earlier, not later. 8 o'clock. And fresh orange juice, not that processed stuff. Fresh orange juice meant squeezing oranges by hand every morning. Another 15 minutes added to a schedule that already had no room for flexibility. And I take a nap every day from 2 to 4, she went on. The house will need to be quiet during that time. No vacuum cleaners, no loud television, no slamming doors. The house would need to be quiet, not her room, the entire house. So for 2 hours every afternoon, everyone would need to tiptoe around because Marissa needed her beauty sleep. Is there anything else? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. I'll think of things as they come up, she said. Change is hard at my age. I'll need time to adjust. Time to adjust. I was the one who'd need time to adjust to having a demanding, critical house guest who expected to be waited on hand and foot. That evening, as I served dinner on a tray that I carried upstairs to Marissa's room, I caught Emma watching me with that same uncomfortable expression she'd worn in the car. Grandma, she said quietly when I came back downstairs, are you okay? Was I okay? I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and rapidly losing any sense of myself as a person rather than a service provider. But how do you explain that to a 15-year-old who's dealing with her own upheaval? I'm fine, sweetheart. I lied. It's just, you seem different. Different. Everyone seemed to notice that I was different, but no one seemed to care about why I was different or what that difference might cost me. Just adjusting to having everyone here, I said. But you shouldn't have to wait on great-grandma Marissa like she's some kind of queen, Emma said, and there was heat in her voice that surprised me. Emma, Sabrina warned from the living room, that's enough. But Mom, I said that's enough. Grandma Margaret is happy to help. Aren't you, Mom? All eyes turned to me, Victor, Sabrina, even Jason looking up from his phone, waiting for me to confirm that yes, I was happy to help, happy to serve, happy to disappear into the role they'd created for me. Of course, I said, because what else could I say? But Emma's question echoed in my head as I cleaned up the kitchen, as I prepared Marissa's medications for the night, as I laid out my own clothes for another day of scheduled servitude. Was I okay? The answer was becoming clearer every day, with every demand, with every assumption that my time and energy belonged to other people. No, I wasn't okay, and if something didn't change soon, I might never be okay again. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 6 weeks after my life had been reorganized around other people's convenience. I should have seen it coming. The signs had been building like pressure in a kettle, but I'd been too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too busy serving everyone else to pay attention to the rage that was quietly building in my chest. It started with Marissa's breakfast tray. I'd been up since 5:30 a.m., which had become my new normal since Victor decided he needed his coffee ready by 6:15 instead of 6:30. The schedule had been adjusted 3 times in 6 weeks, always in ways that required me to wake up earlier or stay up later, always presented as minor tweaks that shouldn't bother someone who had nothing else to do. I'd squeezed fresh orange juice, prepared Marissa's bland scrambled eggs exactly the way she liked them, firm but not rubbery with just a whisper of salt, and arranged everything on the good china tray because she'd complained that regular dishes were common and upset her delicate sensibilities. When I knocked on her door at exactly 8:00 a.m., she called out, "Come in that imperious tone she'd perfected over the past month. "Good morning, Marissa," I said, setting the tray on the small table by her window. "I hope you slept well." "I did not sleep well, she announced, as she did most mornings. "The house is too noisy. Those children stomp around like elephants, and Victor's television was too loud again last night." The children, Emma and Jason, who'd been walking on eggshells around their great-grandmother for weeks, trying to be quiet during her sacred nap times and evening rest periods. the television that Victor watched at normal volume in his own living room. I'll speak to them about it, I said as I did every morning. And another thing, Marissa continued, poking at her eggs with obvious dissatisfaction. These eggs are too dry. I stared at the eggs I'd cooked exactly the way she'd instructed me to cook them every single day for the past month. Would you like me to make fresh ones? No, I'll suffer through them. But tomorrow, remember, firm but moist. It's not that complicated. Firm but moist. The impossible standard that changed depending on her mood, the moving target that ensured I could never get anything quite right. And this orange juice has pulp in it, she added. I specifically told you I can't tolerate pulp. I had strained the juice. I'd strained it through a fine mesh strainer the same way I'd done it every morning since she'd arrived, but apparently I hadn't strained it well enough. I'll strain it better tomorrow, I said. You'll strain it better today, she corrected. I can't drink this. My stomach is very sensitive, as you well know, so I went back downstairs, strained the remaining orange juice through a coffee filter, and climbed back upstairs to deliver the acceptable version. By the time I got back to the kitchen, Victor was pacing impatiently. Where's my lunch, Opasus? He demanded. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 8:20 a.m. According to the schedule, I was supposed to have his lunch packed by 8:15. I'm sorry I was dealing with your mother's breakfast. My lunch should have been ready 5 minutes ago, he interrupted. I can't be late to the job site because you can't manage your time. Manage my time. I was up before dawn and in bed after midnight, every minute accounted for on their precious schedule, and he was lecturing me about time management because I was 5 minutes behind due to his mother's impossible demands. I threw together his sandwich turkey and cheese mustard, but no mayo white bread cut diagonally, and grabbed a bag of chips and an apple from the pantry. My hands were shaking as I packed everything into his lunch cooler. And don't forget, he said as he headed for the door, Mom's having that woman from her church come visit today. I told her you'd make some kind of fancy snacks. Fancy snacks. Another task that hadn't been on the schedule, another expectation dropped on me at the last minute. What time is she coming? I called after him. Around 10, I think. Or maybe 11. Ask my mother. Ask his mother, the woman who changed her requirements daily and treated me like I was slightly dim. Sabrina appeared in the kitchen as Victor's truck rumbled out of the driveway, already dressed for her workday and checking her phone. Morning, Mom. Emma needs to stay after school today for drama club tryouts, so you'll need to pick her up at 5:30 instead of 3:15. Another schedule change announced like it was my problem to solve. That's fine, I said, though it meant rearranging my entire afternoon. I'd need to move the grocery shopping earlier, which meant starting dinner prep later, which meant we'd eat later, which meant I'd be cleaning up later, which meant even less sleep. Oh, and Jason has a project due tomorrow that he needs poster board for, so you'll need to pick that up when you're out. What kind of poster board? I don't know. Ask him. He's your grandson. You can figure it out. My grandson. The boy I barely saw anymore, except when I was driving him somewhere or serving him meals, the child who'd stopped making eye contact with me weeks ago, who seemed embarrassed by my new role in the household. And one more thing, Sabrina said, pausing in the doorway. Victor's mother wants to redecorate her room. She says the blue walls are depressing. Can you pick up some paint samples today? Paint samples for redecorating the room in my own house to suit the preferences of a woman who'd been here for a month and treated me like hired help. What colors does she want? Something cheerful, she said. Yellow maybe, or a warm peach. I nodded because what else could I do? Add paint shopping to an already impossible day, along with fancy snacks and poster board, and Emma's later pickup time. After Sabrina left for her home office, I climbed the stairs again to ask Marissa about her visitor. I found her still in bed, though she'd finished picking at her breakfast. Marissa, Victor mentioned you're having someone from church visit today. Yes, Helen Morrison. She's the president of Our Ladies Auxiliary back home. I told her all about my new living situation. The way she said new living situation made my skin crawl, like she was doing us a favor by living here, like she was slumming it for our benefit. What time should I expect her? Oh, sometime this morning. Helen's very casual about time. Sometime this morning, I was supposed to prepare fancy snacks for a visitor who might arrive any time in the next 4 hours while also managing every other task on my impossible schedule. What kind of snacks would you like me to serve? Something elegant. Helen's used to the finer things. Maybe those little sandwiches with the crust cut off and some kind of cake or pastries. Nothing from the grocery store bakery Helen would notice. Elegant sandwiches and homemade pastries on top of everything else. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I'll see what I can do, I said. Oh, and Margaret, she called as I headed for the door. Helen's diabetic, so make sure there are some sugar-free options, but don't make it obvious she's sensitive about her condition. Sugar-free options that didn't look obviously sugar-free. Another impossible requirement added to an impossible day. By 10 o'clock, I'd made cucumber sandwiches and egg salad sandwiches, both with crusts meticulously removed. I'd baked a coffee cake using sugar substitute, hoping it would pass for regular cake. I'd driven to 3 stores looking for the right poster board for Jason White, but not too white large, but not too large sturdy, but not too expensive. I was arranging the sandwiches on my good china platter when the doorbell rang. Helen Morrison turned out to be a woman in her 70s with perfectly styled white hair and an expression that suggested she was judging everything she saw. She swept into my house like she owned it, barely acknowledging my greeting. "Marissa, darling," she exclaimed, embracing my house guests like they were long-lost sisters. What a charming place you found. A charming place she'd found. Like Marissa had discovered my house on her own rather than moving into her son's arrangement. "Helen, this is Margaret," Marissa said, "and she's been taking care of me." Taking care of her like I was her personal nurse rather than the homeowner being treated like a servant in her own house. "How nice," Helen said, giving me the kind of smile people reserve for the help. "I'm sure Marissa keeps you busy." "She does," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Well, we'll just make ourselves comfortable in the living room," Marissa announced. "Margaret, could you bring the refreshments in about 10 minutes?" Could I bring the refreshments? Not would I not please, could you? But could I phrase like a question but delivered like a command? I served their little tea party on my best china, complete with cloth napkins and tiny silver spoons. Helen made appreciative noises about the presentation, while Marissa basked in the praise like she'd prepared everything herself. "You're so fortunate to have such devoted help," Helen commented as I refilled their teacups. "Yes, Margaret's been quite adequate," Marissa replied. "Though she's still learning my preferences." Still learning her preferences. After 6 weeks of catering to her every whim, adjusting my cooking methods daily based on her contradictory feedback, I was still just learning her preferences. "It must be wonderful for you having a purpose again at your age," Helen said to me. "So many older women struggle with feeling useless after their children grow up." Feeling useless. This stranger sitting in my living room eating food I'd prepared was telling me how wonderful it was that I'd found a purpose serving other people in my own home. "Yes," I managed through gritted teeth. "It's very fulfilling." I escaped to the kitchen and stood at the sink, gripping the edge of the counter while I tried to breathe through the rage that was building in my chest. How had I gotten here? How had I become a person who stood in her own kitchen listening to strangers discuss her usefulness like she wasn't there? The sound of laughter from the living room made me want to scream. They were having a lovely time at my expense, bonding over their shared assumption that I existed to serve them. When Helen finally left 2 hours later, I was behind on everything else. I hadn't started the grocery shopping, I hadn't begun dinner prep, and I still needed to pick up paint samples for Marissa's room redecoration project. "Margaret," Marissa called from the living room as I cleared away the tea service. Helen was very impressed with the refreshments, though she did mention that the coffee cake was a bit dry. The coffee cake that I'd baked with sugar substitute to accommodate her friend's dietary restrictions was too dry. The cake that had required 2 trips to the store to find the right ingredients was inadequate. "I'm sorry it wasn't perfect," I said. "Oh, it's fine. Helen's used to professional quality pastries, so your homemade efforts were perfectly adequate for someone of your skill level." someone of my skill level. I'd been cooking and baking for 45 years, had hosted countless dinner parties, had received compliments on my cooking from everyone who'd ever eaten it. But according to Marissa, I was an amateur whose efforts were merely adequate. That afternoon, while racing through the grocery store trying to buy everything on 3 different lists, mine, Sabrina's, and Marissa's special dietary requirements, I found myself standing in the cereal aisle staring at boxes of cornflakes and wondering if this was what a nervous breakdown felt like. My phone buzzed with a text from Sabrina. "Can you pick up dry cleaning too? Thanks." Thanks. Like I was doing her a favor instead of being ordered around like a personal assistant. Another text, this one from Victor. "Mom says she needs some kind of special soap for sensitive skin. Figure out what kind. Figure out what kind. Drive to the store, research skincare products for elderly women, purchase the correct item with my own money. Also, his mother could have exactly the right soap to wash away the day's complaints." I was loading groceries into my car when my phone rang. Dorothy's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it. When had I last talked to a friend? When had anyone called me just to chat, just because they cared about me as a person rather than what I could do for them? "Hi, Dorothy," I answered. "Margaret, I've been thinking about you. We haven't talked in weeks. How are you doing?" How was I doing? I was standing in a grocery store parking lot loading food I'd bought with my own money to feed people who treated me like a servant, trying not to cry in front of strangers. I started, then stopped. What was I supposed to say? That I was slowly disappearing, that I'd become a ghost in my own life? "I'm managing," I said finally. You sound tired." "It's been a busy day. I was hoping you might be free for lunch tomorrow. I know you've been tied up with family stuff, but I miss you. We all do." Lunch tomorrow. I mentally ran through the schedule that controlled my days. Tomorrow was Wednesday, which meant grocery shopping again, Marissa's doctor's appointment at 2 p.m., Jason's pickup from soccer practice at 4:30, and dinner for 5 people with special dietary accommodations. "I don't think I can," I said. "What about coffee then? Just a quick coffee." Quick coffee. There was no such thing as quick anything in my life anymore. Every minute was accounted for. Every task was connected to 3 other tasks. Every absence required rearrangement of an already impossible schedule. "Dorothy, Margaret, is everything all right? You've been canceling everything for 2 months now. I'm starting to worry." 2 months. Had it really been that long since I'd seen my friends, since I'd done anything for myself? "Everything's fine." I lied. "Just busy." Busy with what exactly? The question hung in the air between us. Busy with what? Busy being a servant in my own home, busy disappearing into other people's needs, busy forgetting who I used to be. "Family obligations," I said. "Margaret, you're scaring me. This doesn't sound like you." It didn't sound like me because it wasn't me. The person Dorothy was talking to was someone else entirely, some shadow version of Margaret Everett who'd forgotten she had the right to say no. "I have to go," I said. "I'm at the store." "Call me later. Please, I'm worried about you." "I'll try," I said, knowing I wouldn't. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, surrounded by grocery bags and fighting back tears. When had everything gotten so twisted? When had I stopped being a person and become a function? The drive home felt like driving toward prison. My own house, the place Frank and I had built a life together, had become a place where I existed only to serve other people's needs. I was unloading groceries when Emma appeared in the kitchen. "Hi, Grandma," she said quietly. "Can I help?" "That's very sweet of you, honey, but you don't need to. I want to help," she interrupted. "You look really tired." I looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her, and saw concern in her 15-year-old eyes. When had she started looking at me like I was something fragile that might break? "Thank you," I said, handing her a bag of groceries. We worked in silence for a few minutes, putting away food and supplies. Emma kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Grandma," she finally said, "why do you do everything for everyone? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you make all the meals and do all the cleaning and drive everyone everywhere and wait on great grandma Marissa like she's some kind of celebrity. Why don't Mom and Victor help? Why didn't they help? Because they decided I was the designated helper, the person whose job it was to make their lives easier, while mine became impossible. Everyone has their roles, I said weakly. But what's your role supposed to be, besides doing everything for everyone else? What was my role supposed to be? I'd been a wife, a mother, a friend, a person with interests and opinions and dreams. Now I was, what? A resource to be utilized. I'm helping the family, I said. But who's helping you? The question hung in the kitchen air like an accusation. Who was helping me? Who was asking if I needed anything, if I was tired, if I was happy? I don't need help, I said automatically. Emma stared at me like I'd just said something incredibly stupid. Grandma, you're working like 18 hours a day. Everyone just orders you around and expects you to do everything. That's not normal. Not normal. A 15-year-old could see what I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. This wasn't normal. This wasn't family. This was something else entirely. Emma, it's complicated. Well, it's not complicated, she said with the brutal honesty that only teenagers could manage. You're letting them treat you like a servant in your own house. The words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. I was letting them treat me like a servant. I'd agreed to it, accepted it, enabled it by going along with their schedule and their demands. But they're family, I said, parroting the phrase that had been used to justify everything. So are you, Emma said simply. You're family too, but they're treating you like you don't matter. Like I didn't matter. The truth of it was devastating and liberating at the same time. Emma, you don't understand. I understand that my grandmother used to be happy, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. I understand that you used to laugh and tell stories and have friends over for dinner. Now you just serve everyone and apologize for everything and look like you're about to cry all the time. Did I look like I was about to cry all the time? Probably because I felt like I was about to cry all the time. This is what family does, I said weakly. We help each other. But Grandma, Emma said, who's helping you? Before I could answer, Victor's truck pulled into the driveway and the moment was broken. Emma grabbed her backpack and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with the question that was going to haunt me for the rest of the day. Who was helping me that evening as I served a dinner I'd prepared with groceries I'd bought to people who barely acknowledged my presence? The question echoed in my head. Who was helping me? As I cleaned up the kitchen while everyone else watched television in the living room, the question grew louder. Who was helping me? As I prepared Marissa's medications and delivered them to her room while she critiqued everything from the water temperature to the way I'd arranged her pills, the question became a drumbeat. Who was helping me? As I laid out clothes for the next day and set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. to start another 18-hour day of serving other people's needs, the question became a scream inside my head. Who was helping me? The answer was nobody. Nobody was helping me because nobody saw me as a person who deserved help. I'd become a resource, a convenience, a solution to everyone else's problems. But I was still a person. Buried under all the schedules and demands and expectations, I was still Margaret Everett. I was still Frank's widow, Emma and Jason's grandmother, someone who'd had a life and dreams and dignity before all this started. That night, lying in my narrow bed in my storage room, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done disappearing. I was done being invisible in my own life. I was done letting other people decide what my life should look like. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and did something I hadn't done in 2 months. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my own kitchen table in silence, watching the sunrise through windows that belonged to me, in a house that belonged to me, thinking about a life that belonged to me. And then I picked up the phone and called a number I'd looked up the night before. Miller and Associates, what is... The receptionist answered. I'd like to speak to an attorney about elder law, I said. What type of issue are you dealing with? I looked around my kitchen at the schedule taped to my refrigerator at the evidence of a life that had been reorganized around other people's convenience. Exploitation, I said. I'm being exploited by my own family. The word felt powerful coming out of my mouth like I was finally naming something that had been poisoning me for months. Can you hold for Attorney Miller? Yes, I said. I'll hold. As I waited, listening to hold music and watching Victor stumble into the kitchen expecting his coffee to be ready, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt like myself again. The woman who answered to Attorney Miller's greeting wasn't the exhausted servant who'd been shuffling through her days on someone else's schedule. She was Margaret Everett, homeowner and human being, and she was ready to take her life back. Mrs. Everett, Attorney David Miller's voice was warm but professional. I understand you're dealing with some family issues. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I think my family is taking advantage of me. Can you tell me more about that? Where did I even begin? How do you explain to a stranger that you'd become a prisoner in your own home, that people who claimed to love you had turned you into unpaid labor? My daughter and son-in-law moved into my house 2 months ago. I started. They said it was temporary, but now they've taken over everything. They've given me a work schedule, they control my finances, and they treat me like hired help. A work schedule. From 6 in the morning until almost midnight, cooking, cleaning, driving, shopping, and now his mother is here too, and she expects me to wait on her hand and foot. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Everett, are you the homeowner? Yes. I've owned this house for 37 years. And are you paying them rent to live there, or are they paying you? The question hit me like a slap. They're not paying me anything. They said my pension and Social Security should cover household expenses. Your money is paying for everything. Yes. Mrs. Everett, I think we need to meet in person. Can you come to my office today? I looked around my kitchen at the breakfast dishes that needed washing at the schedule that demanded I start laundry in 15 minutes. I don't know if I can get away, I said. Mrs. Everett, this is important. What you're describing sounds like elder exploitation, and the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to address. Elder exploitation. The phrase sent a chill through me, but also something else: validation. What was happening to me had a name, which meant it was real, which meant I wasn't crazy for feeling like something was terribly wrong. I can be there at 10, I said. Good. And Mrs. Everett, don't tell anyone in your family about this meeting, not yet. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen feeling like I was planning a prison break, which I realized wasn't far from the truth. Victor wandered in looking annoyed that his coffee wasn't ready. Where's breakfast? Well, he asked. I need to run an errand this morning, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, so I'll be back in a couple of hours. What kind of errand? The question felt like an interrogation. When had I started needing permission to leave my own house? Just some shopping, so I lied. What shopping? I thought you went yesterday. I forgot something. Victor studied my face like he was trying to detect deception. Well, don't be gone long. Mom's expecting her breakfast at 8 sharp. His mother. Not my house guest, not our temporary visitor, but his mother, whose needs trumped everyone else's, including mine. I'll be back in time, I said. The law office of Miller and Associates was in a modest building downtown, the kind of place that dealt with real people's real problems rather than corporate mergers and celebrity divorces. David Miller turned out to be a man in his 50s with kind eyes and the sort of steady demeanor that made you feel like he'd heard everything before. Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Everett, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Tell me about your living situation. I found myself pouring out the entire story, the surprise announcement, the work schedule, the financial takeover, the gradual erosion of my independence. Miller listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. How long have you been the sole owner of the house? He asked when I finished. Since 1987. My husband and I bought it together, but when he died 3 years ago, it became mine outright. And your daughter and son-in-law, do they have any legal claim to the property? No, nothing in writing anyway. What about rent? Have they signed any kind of lease agreement? There's no lease, they just moved in and announced they were staying. Miller nodded, making more notes. Mrs. Everett, what you're describing is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation. Your family members are using your resources for their benefit while providing you with no compensation and no legal protections. Elder financial exploitation, the clinical term for what felt like emotional murder. What can I do? I asked. Several things. First, you need to understand that this is your house. You have the legal right to determine who lives there and under what terms. If you want them to pay rent, they pay rent. If you want them to leave, they leave. But they'll say I'm being selfish, abandoning my grandchildren. Mrs. Everett, Miller interrupted gently, manipulation is part of how exploitation works. They've convinced you that standing up for yourself is selfish. It's not, it's necessary. Standing up for myself wasn't selfish. The concept felt revolutionary. What if they refuse to pay rent or leave? Then we serve them with formal eviction papers. In most cases, the reality of legal consequences gets people's attention very quickly. And his mother told, she's a house guest with no legal right to be there. You can ask her to leave at any time. Ask her to leave. The woman who'd been ordering me around for 6 weeks, treating me like a servant in my own home, could be asked to leave. How long would eviction take for non-paying occupants with no lease? 30 days, maybe less, but Mrs. Everett, I think we should try the direct approach first. What do you mean, yes? Miller opened his desk drawer and pulled out several official-looking documents. Rental agreements. We draw up lease terms that are fair but firm market-rate rent-specific responsibilities, clear boundaries. If they want to live in your house, they do it on your terms. And if they refuse, then we proceed with eviction. But my experience is that most people prefer to negotiate rather than face formal legal action. I stared at the documents, imagining Victor's face when he realized he'd have to pay actual money to live in my house, imagining Sabrina's shock when she discovered that I had legal rights she couldn't just ignore. What would fair rent be? For a 4-bedroom house in your neighborhood, I'd estimate $1,500 a month plus utilities. $1,500. The amount they'd been saving by turning me into unpaid labor while spending my pension on their expenses. And his mother, house guests who stay longer than 2 weeks without contributing to expenses can be asked to leave immediately, no notice required. No notice required. The woman who'd been criticizing my cooking and demanding room service could be told to pack her bags today. Mrs. Everett, I want you to understand something, Miller said, leaning forward slightly. What's been happening to you is not normal family dynamics. It's not your obligation to subsidize other adults' lives at the expense of your own well-being. Not normal family dynamics. A lawyer was telling me what my 15-year-old granddaughter had already figured out. They'll be furious, I said. Probably, but their anger doesn't change your legal rights. They'll say I'm being cruel to my grandchildren. Are you being cruel by expecting their parents to pay for housing like every other adult in America? When he put it that way, it sounded absurd to think otherwise. What do I do first? Miller handed me the rental agreement forms. Take these home, review them. If you decide you want to proceed, bring them back and we'll customize them for your situation. What if they try to, have me declared incompetent or something? Miller's expression hardened. Mrs. Everett, you're clearly competent. You're making rational decisions about your own property. If they attempt any kind of guardianship proceedings, it would be obviously retaliatory, and any judge would see through it. I left Miller's office feeling like I'd been carrying a heavy weight for months and had finally been given permission to put it down. The drive home felt different, not like returning to prison, but like returning to my own property with knowledge of my own power. But when I walked through my front door, the weight settled back onto my shoulders. The kitchen was a disaster, breakfast dishes everywhere, coffee spilled on the counter, Marissa's breakfast tray still sitting on the table with her half-eaten eggs congealing on the plate. "Where have you been?" Sabrina demanded from the living room. "Mom was looking for her breakfast and there's nothing ready for lunch." I looked at the chaos they'd created in the 2 hours I'd been gone, at the mess they'd left for me to clean up, at the evidence of how little they could function without their unpaid servant. "I had an appointment," I said. "What kind of appointment?" "You didn't tell me about any appointment. Since when did I need to clear my schedule with my daughter? Since when did my whereabouts require her approval?" "A personal appointment," I said. Victor appeared in the kitchen doorway looking irritated. "Mom's upset because her breakfast was late, and now she says she won't eat lunch because her routine is disrupted." His mother was upset. The center of the household universe was disturbed because I dared to leave the house without permission. "I'll make her something," I said automatically, then stopped. Why was that my first response? Why was I immediately jumping to solve problems created by other people's helplessness? "You'll make her something." Victor's tone was mocking. "She's been waiting for 2 hours. Her blood sugar is probably all messed up by now." Her blood sugar was my fault. Her disrupted routine was my responsibility. Everything wrong in their world was mine to fix. I looked at Victor, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in months. He was a grown man, perfectly capable of making his mother a sandwich or scrambling eggs or walking to the kitchen to solve his own problems. But he'd learned that all he had to do was blame me and I'd fix everything. "She can make herself something," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. "What did you say?" Sabrina asked from the doorway. "I said she can make herself something. She's a grown woman. She knows where the kitchen is." "Mom, she's 71 years old. I'm 66, I interrupted, "and I've been waiting on her hand and foot for 6 weeks. She's 5 years older than me, not 50 years older." "She has health issues," Victor said. "So do I. I have arthritis and high blood pressure, but that doesn't stop you from expecting me to work 18-hour days." Where was this coming from? This voice that was speaking up for me, setting boundaries, refusing to automatically accept blame for other people's problems. "What's gotten into you?" Sabrina asked, and there was something like fear in her voice. What had gotten into me was self-respect. What had gotten into me was the realization that I had choices, that I had power, that I had rights. "Nothing's gotten into me," I said. "I'm just tired of being taken for granted." "Taken for granted?" Victor's voice was rising. "We're family. You're supposed to help family." "And what are you supposed to do for family?" I asked. "Besides use them?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "We're giving you a place to live," Sabrina said weakly. "This is my house," I said, and the words felt like throwing down a gauntlet. "I'm giving you a place to live, but we're family, Mom," she repeated like a magic spell that would make me forget my own rights. "So am I said, echoing Emma's words from the day before. "I'm family, too." That evening I sat in Frank's study with the rental agreement form spread across his desk. The house was quieter than usual. Everyone seemed to be avoiding me after our kitchen confrontation, like I'd become unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Maybe I had. I read through the rental terms Miller had prepared, imagining Victor's face when he saw the monthly rent amount, imagining Sabrina's shock when she realized that living in my house would cost them money instead of saving it. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I said. Emma peered around the doorframe. "Hi, Grandma. Can I talk to you?" "Of course, sweetheart." She came in and sat in the chair across from Frank's desk, looking more serious than any 15-year-old should have to look. "Mom and Victor are really mad," she said. "I know. They're saying you've changed, that you're not acting like yourself." "What do you think?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I think you're acting more like yourself than you have in months." "More like myself." That's exactly what it felt like. "Are you going to make us move out?" she asked quietly. The question broke my heart. "Oh, sweetheart, I would never throw you out on the street. But your parents, they need to start treating this like what it is, my house that they live in, not their house that I work in." "What does that mean?" I looked at this young woman who'd been watching her grandmother disappear for months, who'd been living in a house where adults exploited other adults and called it family loyalty. It means that if your parents want to live here, they need to pay rent like any other tenants. It means they need to do their share of housework instead of expecting me to do everything. It means I get to have a life that isn't completely devoted to serving other people. And Great Grandma Marissa needs to find somewhere else to live. Emma nodded slowly. She's pretty horrible to you. She is, and I don't have to tolerate being treated horribly in my own home. Will Mom and Victor pay rent? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Would they accept the new reality or would they fight me on it? I don't know, I said honestly, but if they won't, they'll have to find somewhere else to live. And if they make us move, will you be okay by yourself? The question revealed so much about Emma's understanding of the situation, about how this family dynamic had twisted everyone's perspective. She was worried about me being alone, not understanding that I'd been utterly alone, even with a house full of people who treated me like furniture. I'll be fine, I said. Better than fine. I'll be free. That night I called Dorothy. Margaret, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I was so worried after our conversation yesterday. I'm sorry I've been so distant, I said. Things have been complicated. What's going on? And don't tell me everything's fine because I know you better than that. So I told her everything. The work schedule, the financial exploitation, the gradual erasure of my independence, the way I'd been turned into a servant in my own home. My God, Margaret, Dorothy said when I finished. Why didn't you tell someone sooner? Because I thought it was normal, I admitted. I thought this was what family did. Family doesn't exploit each other. Family doesn't turn each other into unpaid labor. I know that now. I saw a lawyer today. Good for you. What did he say? I told her about the rental agreements, about my legal rights, about the possibility of eviction if they refused to accept reasonable terms. I'm proud of you, Dorothy said. It takes courage to stand up to family, especially when they've convinced you that standing up for yourself is wrong. I'm scared, I admitted. Of course you are. But Margaret, you can't keep living like this. You're disappearing. Disappearing. That's exactly what had been happening. I'd been vanishing bit by bit until there was nothing left but a function, a resource, a solution to other people's problems. What if they leave and never speak to me again? Then you'll know they never really loved you, Dorothy said gently. They loved what you did for them. There's a difference. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm again and made myself coffee. But this time when Victor stumbled into the kitchen expecting his coffee to be ready, I was sitting at the table with the rental agreement form spread in front of me. What's all that? He asked suspiciously. Rental agreements, I said calmly. If you and Sabrina want to continue living in my house, you'll need to sign one. The color drained from his face. Rental agreements, $1,500 a month plus utilities, standard lease terms. Are you out of your mind? What he exploded. We're family. Yes, we are, and family members who live in other family members' houses pay rent. Sabrina appeared in the doorway, drawn by Victor's raised voice. What's going on? Your mother's lost her mind, Victor said. Oh, she wants us to pay rent. Rent? Sabrina's voice was high with disbelief. Mom, this is insane. We can't afford rent right now. That's why we're living here. Then you need to figure out how to afford it, I said, because those are the terms. We'll see about that, Victor said, and there was something threatening in his tone. Yes, I agreed. We will. That afternoon, while they were at work and school, I called Attorney Miller. They refused the rental agreements, I told him. What's next? Eviction papers, Miller said without hesitation. I'll have them ready by tomorrow. And his mother, Tsum. I'll prepare a notice to vacate for her as well. She'll have 48 hours to leave voluntarily before we take legal action. 48 hours. In less than 2 days, Marissa could be out of my house and the gradual process of reclaiming my life could begin. Mrs. Everett, Miller said, are you ready for this to get unpleasant? Was I ready? I thought about the past 2 months, about the work schedule taped to my refrigerator, about being treated like hired help in my own home, about slowly disappearing until I was nothing but a function. I'm ready, I said. The next evening, when everyone was home, I served dinner as usual. But after the plates were cleared, I remained standing at the head of the dining room table. I have an announcement, I said. The conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, Victor suspicious, Sabrina worried, Emma alert, Jason confused, Marissa imperious. I saw a lawyer yesterday, I began, about my legal rights regarding this house. Oh, for crying out loud, Victor muttered. Let me finish, I said, and something in my voice made him close his mouth. This is my house. I own it outright. I have the right to determine who lives here and under what terms. Mom, what are you saying? Sabrina asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out the official documents Miller had prepared. I'm saying that Victor and Sabrina, you have 30 days to either sign rental agreements or find somewhere else to live. The silence was profound. And Marissa, I continued, placing a separate document in front of her, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The explosion was immediate and deafening. You can't be serious, Victor shouted. Mom, you can't throw us out, Sabrina cried. I knew you were selfish, but this is beyond the pale, Marissa said coldly. I stood there weathering their outrage and felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt powerful. These are legal documents, I said when the shouting died down. I suggest you read them carefully. We'll fight this, Victor said. You can't just kick family out on the street. Actually, I can, I said, and I am. Grandma, Jason spoke up for the first time, looking confused and scared. Are you making us leave? My heart broke for him, but I knelt down so we were at eye level. No, sweetheart. I'm asking your parents to start acting like grown-ups. If they choose to leave instead, that's their decision. But where will we go? Emma asked. That's not my problem to solve, I said, and the words felt like liberation. I've been solving everyone else's problems for 2 months and now I'm done. That night, as I listened to the heated arguments and frantic phone calls happening throughout my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Frank died. I felt like myself again. Tomorrow the real battle would begin, but tonight, for the first time in months, I went to sleep knowing that I had choices, that I had power, that I had rights, and I was finally ready to use them. The morning after I served the eviction papers, I woke up to silence. Not the usual sounds of Victor's alarm or his stomping around the master bedroom, not Marissa's imperious calls for her breakfast tray, just blessed, peaceful silence. For a moment I wondered if they'd all packed up and left in the night. But when I made my way to the kitchen, I found evidence that the war was far from over. Every cabinet door hung open, every drawer had been pulled out and left that way. The refrigerator door stood ajar, and someone had deliberately left the coffee pot on with no water in it, so the house smelled like burned metal and spite. On my kitchen table sat a handwritten note in Sabrina's careful script. We've gone to stay with the Hendersons until we can figure out what to do. The kids need to know their grandmother has lost her mind. We'll be back for our things. Their grandmother had lost her mind. The woman who'd been working 18-hour days to serve their needs, who'd been paying all their expenses while being treated like hired help, who'd finally stood up for herself, she was the one who'd lost her mind. I looked around at the deliberate destruction they'd left behind and felt something unexpected relief. This petty vandalism, this childish tantrum confirmed everything Attorney Miller had told me about manipulation and exploitation. They weren't angry because they loved me and felt betrayed. They were angry because their free ride was over. I spent the morning cleaning up their mess, but it felt different from all the cleaning I'd done over the past 2 months. This time I was cleaning up after them for the last time. This time every dish I washed and every cabinet I closed was an act of reclaiming my own space. Around 10 o'clock, the front door opened without a knock. Victor's heavy footsteps echoed through the house as he made his way to the kitchen. We need to talk, he announced, standing in my doorway like an invading army. Good morning to you too, Victor. I said mildly, continuing to wipe down counters. Don't play games with me, Margaret. You know this whole rental agreement thing is ridiculous. I turned to face him fully. What's ridiculous about expecting adults to pay for housing? We're family. Family doesn't charge each other rent. And family doesn't turn each other into unpaid servants, but here we are. Victor's face was red with anger, but there was something else there too, panic. He was starting to realize that his comfortable arrangement was really over, that he'd have to figure out how to support his family without using me as a resource. Look, maybe we got a little carried away with the schedule thing, he said, shifting tactics. We can adjust that, but this rent demand is crazy. $1,500 a month, we can't afford that. Then you can't afford to live in a $1,500 house, I said simply. But where are we supposed to go? The question that wasn't my responsibility to answer, though they'd convinced me it was for months. That's not my problem, Victor. Not your problem, son. His voice was rising again. Emma and Jason are your grandchildren. You're willing to make them homeless because you're having some kind of senior moment. Senior moment. My decision to stop being exploited was being dismissed as a mental health episode. I'm not making anyone homeless, I said. I'm offering you housing at market rates. You're choosing to refuse it. We can't afford market rates. Then you need to make some changes in your life. Get better jobs, move somewhere cheaper, make the same decisions every other adult in America has to make. You're being cruel and selfish, he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Cruel and selfish. For months, those words would have devastated me, would have sent me scrambling to apologize and accommodate. Now they just sounded like noise. Victor, I want you to leave, I said calmly. Leave. This is my home. No, it's my home, and you're not welcome here unless you're prepared to pay rent and treat me with respect. Respect. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? I asked. You moved into my house, took over my bedroom, spent my money, turned me into your personal servant, and invited your mother to do the same. What part of that was doing something for me? He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. The idea that I might have gotten something other than benefit from this arrangement clearly had never occurred to him. You weren't alone anymore, he said finally. I was more alone than I've ever been in my life, I replied. Being surrounded by people who don't see you as a person is the loneliest thing in the world. Before Victor could respond, I heard another set of footsteps on the front porch. The door opened again, and Sabrina walked in looking haggard and desperate. Mom, thank God you're being reasonable, she said, apparently mistaking my calm tone for capitulation. We need to work this out. I am working it out, I said, and I have given you legal options. You can sign the rental agreement or you can find somewhere else to live. Mom, listen to yourself. You're talking about making your own grandchildren homeless. Your children aren't homeless. They have parents who are responsible for housing them. We can't afford an apartment and rent to you, Sabrina said. It's impossible. Then you should have thought of that before you quit your job to work from home. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's what had happened, though we'd never discussed it directly. Sabrina had left her office job shortly after moving in, claiming she could make more money freelancing. In reality, she'd wanted the flexibility to manage her new household servant, me. I quit that job because you needed help managing everything here, she said weakly. I never asked for help managing anything. You moved in and took over. Because you were struggling, because you were depressed and isolated and not taking care of yourself. I was grieving, I said firmly. There's a difference between grieving and being incapable. And even if I had been struggling, the solution wasn't to turn me into unpaid labor. We weren't, Sabrina started. You gave me a work schedule, I interrupted. 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. You controlled my finances, my time, my social life. What would you call that? We call it family, Victor said. I call it exploitation. The word landed between us like a grenade. Elder exploitation. What Attorney Miller had named it, what I'd finally learned to call it myself. You can't be serious, Sabrina whispered. I'm completely serious. And I have documentation to prove it. That was a bluff. I hadn't been documenting anything, but it worked. Both Victor and Sabrina looked genuinely frightened. Mom, please, Sabrina said, tears starting in her eyes. We're family. We can work this out. We can work it out, I agreed. Sign the rental agreement, pay market rate rent, do your own housework, and treat me like a human being instead of a servant. Those are my terms. We can't afford market rate rent, Victor said again. Then you can't afford to live here. But the kids will adapt to whatever housing their parents provide for them, just like every other child in America. The tears were flowing freely down Sabrina's face now. Mom, I don't understand what happened to you. You used to care about family. I still care about family, so, I said. That's why I'm teaching my grandchildren that adults take responsibility for themselves, that people in families treat each other with respect, and that love doesn't mean servitude. This isn't love, Victor spat. This is selfishness. Yes, I said, and the word felt like freedom. It is selfish. I'm finally being selfish enough to demand basic human dignity in my own home. They left after that, Victor slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, Sabrina sobbing as she followed him to the car. I watched them drive away and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The house was quiet again, but this time it was the good kind of quiet, the kind where I could hear my own thoughts, where I could move at my own pace, where no one was waiting for me to serve them. I made myself a proper lunch, not something quickly grabbed between tasks, but an actual meal that I sat down to eat at my own table. I read while I ate something from the stack of books that had been gathering dust since my life became a work schedule. When I finished, I left my dishes in the sink and went to take a nap in the middle of the afternoon just because I could. Around 4 o'clock, the phone rang. I expected it to be Sabrina or maybe Victor calling to make more demands or threats. Instead, it was Emma. Hi, Grandma, she said quietly. Can I come see you? Of course, sweetheart. Where are you? At school still. Drama club. Mom was supposed to pick me up, but she forgot, and when I called her, she was crying and said she couldn't drive right now. My heart clenched. Whatever else was happening, Emma was still a 15-year-old girl who needed reliable adults in her life. I'll be right there, I said. The drive to Emma's school felt like the first normal thing I'd done in months. Not a task on someone else's schedule, not a demand made by someone who saw me as transportation rather than as a person. Just a grandmother picking up her granddaughter because that's what grandmothers do. Emma got in the car looking tired and stressed, older than her 15 years. Thank you for coming, she said. Of course I came. You're my granddaughter. Even though Mom and Victor are mad at you, especially because they're mad at me. We drove in silence for a few minutes before Emma spoke again. Are they really going to have to move out? If they won't pay rent, yes. Good, she said, and the word was fierce. I hate living there. The admission surprised me. You hate living in my house. I hate the way they treat you there. I hate watching you disappear. I hate that they turned you into some kind of servant and pretended it was normal. Disappear. The same word Dorothy had used, the same word I'd been thinking but hadn't been able to say out loud. I thought maybe you hadn't noticed, I said. Of course I noticed. Jason noticed too, but he's only 13, so he just got quiet and stayed in his room most of the time. But I noticed. We both did. Why didn't you say anything? Emma was quiet for a long time. Because we're kids, she said finally. And kids don't get to tell their parents they're being horrible to their grandmother, but that doesn't mean we didn't see it. I'm sorry you had to see it. I'm not sorry, Emma said fiercely. I'm glad I saw it because now I know what it looks like when someone gets treated badly by people who claim to love them. I'll never let anyone do that to me. Her words hit me like a physical blow. This whole nightmare had taught my granddaughter a lesson, but not the one her parents intended. Instead of learning that family members sacrifice for each other, she'd learned that love and exploitation can look very similar, and that sometimes you have to fight for your right to be treated with dignity. Where are you staying tonight? I asked. With the Hendersons, Mom's friend from work. It's awkward. Would you like to stay with me instead? Emma turned to look at me, hope lighting up her face. Really? But what about Mom and Victor? You're my granddaughter. My house is always open to you, regardless of what's happening with your parents. What about Jason? Jason, too, if he wants to come. But not Mom and Victor. Not unless they're willing to follow the same rules as any other adults who live in my house. Emma nodded slowly. That seems fair. Fair. The concept had been foreign to my house for months, but it was starting to feel possible again. That evening, Emma called her mother to explain that she was staying with me. I could hear Sabrina's raised voice through the phone, a rapid stream of accusations and manipulations designed to make Emma feel guilty for choosing her grandmother over her parents. Mom, stop, Emma said finally. I'm not choosing sides. I'm choosing to stay somewhere that I don't have to watch the adults in my family treat each other horribly. There was more shouting from Sabrina's end, and then Emma handed me the phone. She wants to talk to you, Emma said, looking apologetic. Margaret, you cannot turn our children against us, Sabrina said without preamble. I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm offering Emma a place to stay where she feels comfortable. She feels comfortable here. Apparently not, or she wouldn't have asked to stay with me. You're poisoning her against her own parents. Sabrina, Emma has eyes. She's been watching this family dynamic for months. She's capable of forming her own opinions. She's 15 years old. Yes, she is. And she's smart enough to recognize dysfunction when she sees it. There was a pause, and when Sabrina spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain. Mom, I don't understand what went wrong. We were trying to help you. You were trying to help yourselves, I said gently, and you convinced yourselves it was the same thing. But you were lonely and isolated, and I was grieving. There's a difference. We gave you purpose structure. You gave me a work schedule and called it purpose. We're family, so yes, we are, and family members treat each other with respect and consideration. They don't exploit each other and call it love. Another long pause. What do you want from us? Sabrina asked finally. I want you to be adults. I want you to take responsibility for your own lives instead of using me as a resource to manage your problems. I want to be your mother instead of your employee. But we can't afford, well, then figure it out, I said firmly. The same way every other adult has to figure it out. After I hung up, Emma and I sat in my living room, not their entertainment center, and talked, really talked for the first time in months. Were you scared, she asked, when you decided to fight back? Terrified, I admitted. What made you do it anyway? I thought about the question, about the moment when something inside me had snapped. I realized I was disappearing, I said, and I decided I'd rather be alone and myself than surrounded by people and be nobody. You're not nobody, Emma said fiercely. You're my grandmother. You're Margaret Everett. You're the woman who taught me to make chocolate chip cookies and took me to my first museum and always remembered my birthday even when my parents were too busy. And was I still that person? After months of being nothing but a function, a solution to other people's problems, was there still a Margaret Everett underneath all the servitude, looking at Emma's face, seeing the love and respect there that had been absent from her parents' eyes for so long? I thought maybe there was. The next morning I woke up in my own bed, not the master bedroom that still felt too much like Victor and Sabrina's space, but the guest room, which was larger and more comfortable than the storage room I'd been relegated to. Emma was in her old room, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, according to what she told me the night before. I made coffee and breakfast, but this time it was a choice rather than an obligation. This time I was cooking for people who appreciated it rather than expected it. Around 9 o'clock, Attorney Miller called. How did the eviction notice go over, Bob? He asked. About as well as you'd expect. They're staying with friends and claiming I've lost my mind. That's fairly typical. Any threats of legal action against you? Not yet, but the day is young. Miller chuckled. Mrs. Everett, I want you to know that if they do try to challenge your competency or claim undue influence or anything along those lines, it won't get far. You're clearly acting rationally in your own best interests. What about custody issues? Emma is staying with me. That's between Emma and her parents unless they can prove you're an unfit guardian, which would be impossible given the circumstances. What's next? We wait. Either they come to terms with the new reality and sign the rental agreements, or they don't, and we proceed with formal eviction. Either way, you win. Either way, I won. The concept felt revolutionary. That afternoon, Jason showed up at my front door looking uncertain and carrying a backpack. Hi, Grandma, he said quietly. Emma said I could stay here too. Of course you can, sweetheart. This is your home too. But what about Mom and Victor? What about them? They said you don't want them to live here anymore. I knelt down so we were at eye level the same way I'd done when he was worried about moving out. Jason, I want your mom and Victor to live here if they want to. But they have to follow the same rules as any other grown-ups who live in someone else's house. Like paying rent. Like paying rent. And not being mean to you out of the mouths of babes. A 13-year-old understood the situation better than the adults involved. And not being mean to me, I agreed. That seems fair, Thess, he said, echoing his sister's words from the day before. That evening, the three of us had dinner together, Emma, Jason, and me. It was the first meal in months that felt like a family dinner rather than a catering service. We talked and laughed and argued about what to watch on television afterward. It was normal and peaceful and everything that family meals should be. Around 8 o'clock, Victor's truck pulled into the driveway. Should we go upstairs? Emma asked, recognizing the signs of incoming drama. No, I said. This is your home too. You have every right to be here. Victor came through the front door without knocking, followed by Sabrina. They both looked haggard and desperate. We want to talk, Victor announced. We're listening, I said calmly. Not in front of the kids. The kids live here, I said. They're part of this conversation. Margaret, this is adult business. Victor, everything that's happened in this house has affected these children. They deserve to hear what's being decided about their lives. Sabrina sat down heavily in one of the living room chairs. We've been thinking about your proposal. The rental agreement isn't a proposal. It's a legal requirement if you want to continue living here. We can't afford $1,500 a month, Victor said bluntly. Then you can't afford to live here, I replied just as bluntly. But we could maybe do $800, Sabrina said hopefully, and I could pick up more work. The rent is $1,500 plus utilities. That's market rate for this neighborhood. But we're families. Yes, we are, and family members pay their own way instead of exploiting each other. Mom, Sabrina's voice broke. Please, we don't have anywhere else to go. You have lots of places to go. You can rent an apartment like millions of other families do. You can move to a less expensive area. You can get better jobs or second jobs. You have all the same options as every other adult in America. But those options are hard, Victor said, and for the first time he sounded less angry than defeated. Yes, I agreed. They are hard. Being a grown-up is hard, but it's your responsibility, not mine. What about Emma and Jason? Sabrina asked. What if we can't find anywhere that takes kids? Then you'll have to work harder to find a place or make compromises or figure out creative solutions, the same way every other parent has to do. You're really going to let your grandchildren suffer because we can't pay some arbitrary rent amount. I'm not letting anyone suffer, I said firmly. I'm refusing to subsidize your inability to adult properly. Emma and Jason are welcome to stay here as long as they want. You and Victor are welcome to stay here if you pay rent and follow the house rules. Those are your options. The room was quiet for a long time. Finally, Emma spoke up. Mom, why don't you just get jobs and pay Grandma rent like she's asking? It's not that simple, honey, Sabrina said. It sounds pretty simple to me, Jason added. Grown-ups are supposed to pay for where they live. You kids don't understand, Victor started. We understand that you've been living here for free while treating Grandma like a servant, Emma said, and there was steel in her 15-year-old voice. We understand that instead of being grateful, you've been acting like she owes you something. Emma, Sabrina gasped, that's not how we raised you to talk to adults. You raised me to stand up for what's right, Emma shot back. And this is right. Victor stood up abruptly. We're not going to sit here and be lectured by children. Then don't, I said mildly. You know where the door is. Fine, he said, but don't expect us to come crawling back when you get lonely and realize what you've lost. What have I lost? I asked, genuinely curious. 2 people who treated me like unpaid help, a son-in-law who saw me as a resource instead of a person, a daughter who forgot I was her mother and started treating me like an employee. You've lost your family, Sabrina said, tears streaming down her face. No, I said gently. I've lost 2 people who were exploiting me and calling it family. My actual family is right here. I gestured to Emma and Jason, who were sitting on either side of me on the couch. Those are our children, Victor said. Yes, they are, and they're my grandchildren. And right now they're choosing to stay with the family member who treats them with respect and dignity. After they left, the 3 of us sat in the living room in comfortable silence. Finally, Emma spoke. Are you sad? She asked. Was I sad? I was many things, relieved, exhausted, proud, scared, hopeful, but sad. I'm sad that it came to this, I said honestly. I'm sad that your parents couldn't see me as a person instead of a resource, but I'm not sad about standing up for myself. I'm proud of you, Jason said quietly, and the words hit me like a gift. Thank you, sweetheart. What happens now? Emma asked. What happened now was that I got to find out who I was when I wasn't serving other people's needs every waking moment. What happened now was that I got to rediscover Margaret Everett, the person who'd existed before grief and loneliness made her vulnerable to exploitation. Now we figure out what normal looks like, I said. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my garden on a Tuesday afternoon reading a book and drinking coffee when Dorothy called. How are you doing? She asked, and for the first time in months, the question had a good answer. I'm doing wonderfully, I said and meant it. Any word from Sabrina and Victor? They found an apartment across town. 2 bedrooms, which means Emma and Jason have to share, and it's not in as nice a neighborhood as this one, but it's what they can afford. Are they managing VC? Barely. Sabrina got a full-time job at an insurance office and Victor's working overtime. They're learning what their actual earning power is without someone subsidizing their lifestyle. And the kids. Emma and Jason come over every weekend and most weekday afternoons. We're closer now than we've been since they were little. And you, how are you really? I looked around my garden at the flowers I'd planted and tended myself at the book in my lap that I was reading at my own pace at the coffee cup that I'd filled when I wanted coffee rather than when someone else demanded it. I'm myself again, I said. For the first time in years, I'm myself again. I'm proud of you, you know. It took incredible courage to stand up to them. It took incredible desperation, I corrected. I was disappearing, and I decided I'd rather exist as myself than disappear as someone else's servant. And that evening, Emma and Jason came over for dinner as they did most nights now. We cooked together, ate together, and cleaned up together, not because I demanded their help, but because they offered it freely. Grandma, Emma said, as we finished putting away the last of the dishes. Mom asked me to ask you something. Oh, she wanted to know if you'd consider lowering the rent if they apologized and promised to do better. I dried my hands on the dish towel and considered the question. Would I consider it? Did I want them back? What do you think I should do? I asked. I think you should charge them double, Emma said fiercely. They had their chance to treat you right and they blew it. Emma, I said gently, they're still your parents. I know, and I love them, but that doesn't mean they deserve to get rewarded for treating you badly. Out of the mouths of babes. What about you, Jason? What do you think? Jason considered the question seriously the way he approached everything. I think they should have to prove they've really changed before you trust them again, he said, and even then they should have to pay regular rent like everyone else. My grandchildren had learned the lessons I'd hoped to teach them, that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, that family relationships should be based on mutual respect, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is maintain healthy boundaries. I think you're both very wise, I said. Later that night, after the kids had gone back to the Hendersons' house where their parents were still staying while they saved money for an apartment deposit, I called Sabrina. Emma said you had a question for me, I said when she answered. Mom. Her voice was small and certain. I was wondering, if we apologized, if we promised to do better, would you consider adjusting the rental terms? What kind of adjustment? Maybe less money, and we could help around the house more, do more of the cooking and cleaning. The same trap repackaged. They still saw me as someone who existed to make their lives easier, whose value lay in what I could provide rather than who I was. Sabrina, I said gently, do you understand why I asked you to leave? Because we weren't paying rent. No, because you stopped seeing me as a person. There was a long silence. I don't understand, she said finally. You turned me into a function. I wasn't your mother anymore. I was your housekeeper, your cook, your chauffeur, your child care provider. I was a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved. But we do love you. Then prove it by treating me like someone you love instead of someone you use. Another silence. I don't know how, she whispered, and for the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter instead of my employer. You start by seeing me as an equal instead of as someone who exists to serve you. You start by asking what I need instead of just telling me what you need. You start by treating this relationship like it goes both ways. Could you help us learn how to do that? The question broke my heart because it revealed how far we'd all traveled from normal family relationships, but it also gave me hope because it suggested that maybe someday we could find our way back. I can try, I said, but it has to be real change, not just words, and the rental agreement stands. If you want to live in my house, you pay market rent and follow the same rules as any other tenant. But that's so much money. Then you need to earn more money or live somewhere cheaper. Those are your options. You're really not going to help us. I am helping you. I'm helping you learn to be adults. 6 months later, I was hosting Christmas dinner in my own home for the first time in years. Emma and Jason were there, of course, along with Dorothy and a few other friends who'd become family over the decades. Sabrina and Victor came too, but as guests rather than residents. They'd found a small apartment they could afford and were slowly learning to manage their own lives. The house felt like mine again. My decorations chosen because I liked them rather than because they fit someone else's aesthetic. My menu planned around foods I enjoyed rather than dietary restrictions imposed by demanding house guests. My pace relaxed and comfortable rather than frantically scheduled. Grandma, Emma said as we were clearing the dessert plates, do you ever regret it? Making them leave? I looked around my dining room at the faces of people who saw me as a person rather than a resource at the evidence of a life reclaimed. Never go, I said. Not for a single moment. Even when it was scary. Especially when it was scary. The scariest thing I ever did was stand up for myself, and it was also the best thing I ever did. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in Frank's study and thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, lost in grief, vulnerable to exploitation, slowly disappearing under the weight of other people's needs. She was gone now, that shadow version of myself. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth, someone who knew the difference between love and manipulation. I was Margaret Everett again. Not just Frank's widow or Sabrina's mother or Emma and Jason's grandmother, but Margaret a complete person with rights and needs and dreams of her own. The greatest lesson I'd learned was one I wished I'd known years earlier. It's never too late to reclaim your self-respect, and no one, not even family, has the right to take it away. Looking back now, I can see that losing my dignity was the first step toward finding my strength. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you were to discover who you actually are, and who I actually was, it turned out was worth fighting for.